In 1725, a young man named John reached a turning point in his career. Recently graduated from college, John was entering the ministry as a preacher. But ironically, he was also at one of the lowest points in his life. At a gathering one evening, John struck up a conversation with Tom, a doorman. It was very cold that night, and Tom wasn't dressed for the weather. He was urged to go home and get his coat, so he did. When he returned, John noticed that his coat wasn't much of a coat. You see, Tom was very poor. John asked him if that was the only coat that he owned. Yes, he replied, and I thank God for it, such as it is. And then Tom proceeded to thank God for the good, clear water he was able to drink that day. Because having clean water was a luxury to Tom. John was intrigued by this man's thankfulness to God. So he asked, "What else are you thankful for?" "I thank God that I have dry stones to lay on." John was amazed how this poor man could be so thankful for so little. How could there be such depth in his relationship with God in his condition? Tom continued, "I thank God that He has given me life and being. And I thank God for a heart to love Him and a desire to serve Him." This man was thankful for the few fragments of God's blessings that he had found. John went home that evening convinced of what he suspected, that there was something missing from his own faith. He didn't possess what Tom had, and he desperately wanted it. John saw that even the fragments of God's blessings was enough for this poor man, and he had been missing it. Now he wanted to pick up every scrap and cherish it, leaving nothing behind. That John, of course, was John Wesley, who later became the founder of the Methodist Church in the new United States of America. Throughout the Bible, we read about the fragments of God's blessings. Whenever God moves, the fragments of His blessings are left. But like John Wesley, oftentimes we miss them because to us, they're too small to really make a difference in our life. There is a time of the barley harvest in Israel during the feast of the Passover when the priest would take barley and wave it as a wave offering in the temple. This was a form of praise for the harvest, a giving of the first fruits of the gathering of the grain. Now, barley wasn't the favored bread of the people, but sometimes that's all they had to make bread. The bread was not the best tasting or quality, and it was very coarse in texture. A lot of the ladies here know that have cooked barley bread. More often, it was used as feed for the animals then. Only the poorest of people would live on barley bread. Those who could afford it would eat bread that was made from flour that came from the wheat harvest. Now, in the book of John, chapter 6, there is a story that pretty much all of us know pretty well, about 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. Jesus feeds over 5,000 people.
Behold the multitude. Send them away that they may go into the villages and buy themselves bread. They have nothing to eat. Give ye them to eat.
Shall we go and buy 200 pennyworth of bread and give them to eat?
How many loaves have ye? 5, 2 fishes. Bring them to me. Divide the people into companies of 50 that they might be fed. O Father, Lord of heaven and earth, I thank you for thy bounties. Amen.
Jesus instructed the disciples to feed the people, and the source never ran dry. It is interesting that Jesus chose the barley loaves to serve. Why barley? Why not make it the preferred bread? I mean, he made it. Why not make it the preferred bread, the one that was made of the flour from the wheat harvest? To the hungry people, it probably didn't matter what kind of bread it was. But then again, what if it did? What if there were some that rejected the barley bread because it was too coarse or too hard to digest? That may sound crazy, thinking that anyone would do such a thing, but think about it. The very thing we need most that will help us grow spiritually can oftentimes be the hardest thing to swallow. The trials and tests that build our faith are seldom pleasant. But whenever we refuse to trust God, we fail to see the fragments of blessings that are all around us. God is always at work, constantly moving in the lives of the multitudes, touching people every second. And sometimes we are part of that miracle. Sometimes we are receiving that miracle. And sometimes we are gathering the fragments from that miracle. But we have to look for it, don't we? Because many times we don't know what it is. We see it another way, and not the way God has it for us. Each time the disciples reached in for another barley loaf, there was another barley loaf to take. And this is true for us as well. Let's say you're moved to invite someone over after church today, or maybe to call someone who's missed maybe a month of church, or perhaps to help a complete stranger sometime today. Immediately, we analyze the situation. It just comes to us. Do I really have time to do this? If I call them, what if I offend them? Am I doing the right thing giving this complete stranger some money? The truth is, in order to see the miracle happen, in order to receive the blessing, we must choose to participate in what God's doing. The disciples had to reach into that basket and take out the bread. It didn't just appear all at once. And even when we choose to participate, it may not turn out the way we thought it would be. And the disciples took out the barley bread. When they took out the barley bread, it never changed into the nice soft bread, did it? It continued to be barley bread. We are invited to be a part of the miracle. God is doing the miracle. We are not doing the miracle. But as we participate, we receive the fragments of the blessings in what God is doing. Perhaps by choosing the barley bread to feed the 5,000, Jesus was saying this: though the bread I sometimes offer may not be the most favored thing in your life, it will be more than sufficient to meet all your needs. God's baskets are never empty. And the blessings we find will depend upon our level of spiritual hunger. Are you spiritually hungry enough to pick up the fragments of God's blessings? Or are you waiting for something bigger? When they were filled, he said unto his disciples, gather up the fragments that remain. Let nothing be wasted. And so the disciples gathered all that was left. Now there's a word called peah among the Jews, which means residue. The peah is what's left over after a meal. And this becomes the property of those who serve the meal. So after feeding all those people, whatever was left would belong to the disciples, meaning they would receive the fragments left over. What exactly are fragments? Pieces of bread or fish that were unused, partially consumed, broken in little pieces, perhaps crushed into the grass, stepped on and left behind unwanted, cast aside as something worthless. How would you feel if you were one of those disciples? You just participated in this great miracle, feeding over 5,000 people with just a few loaves of barley bread and some fish. Now you're hungry just like everyone else. Your stomach has been growling. But everyone else needed to be fed first. That's okay. But now it's your turn. So you join the other disciples, expecting to have plenty to eat because there was plenty to eat. But then Jesus says, go pick up the fragments left on the ground to eat. Fragments? The crumbs on the ground? The leftovers from what people ate? Sitting on? Stepping on? How would that make you feel? The thing is, the disciples had a different kind of hunger, a spiritual hunger. And they understood that the fragments that they were sent to gather were more than just the leftovers. They were the fragments of God's blessing. They were a part of God's miracle of provision. Every fragment had value. Therefore, they gathered them together and filled 12 baskets with the fragments of the 5 barley loaves. 12 baskets for the disciples. That in itself is a miracle, because the disciples could see the blessings. They saw the fragments as the blessings. Each of them was given a full basket of these fragments containing the blessings of God. And these same blessings are for us. Every time we choose to see the blessings of God around us, no matter how small they may seem. What if each of us were given a basket? Not a basket that you carry in your hand, but a basket you carry in your heart. And in that basket, you were to carry every fragment of God's blessings that you could possibly hold. Jesus said, let nothing be wasted. How many fragments of God's blessings are we leaving on the ground around us? How hungry are you? Look around you. They're everywhere just to be gathered. Even the smallest crumb from the bread of life will sustain you. Let us pray.